Welcome, welcome, welcome all. Welcome. Kia ora to everybody. There's people coming through the doors. This is the last of a big season for a big year for the Fabians. We've done over 20 of these seminars this year, 20 and 25. We're very pleased, and this is the last of our seminars. And we're looking to 26, I think, with anticipation. And that's why we decided that we should invite key members of the union movement to talk to us, because next year is going to be a big year for us all. Before we do anything, there's the exit over there with a whiteboard blocking the way. And you'll be here. And the exit is up the back here. This is a joint branch meeting of the Industrial Maritime branch and the Fabians. And I have to say, the Industrial Maritime branch, we had our little meeting earlier on, and we had a Green Party member attend. Isn't that nice? Yeah, so Elizabeth, thank you very much for coming to our meeting. So the Industrial Maritime branch has an ominous history in the Labour movement, because it was the place where, and as Richard knows, a good friend of the Labour Party, Jean Leckie. There's people throwing things at me. Don't do that. Was a key member, and it was with great pleasure that we managed to wrest that branch off his little hands. What I'd like to, before introducing Annie, Sandra, and Marlon, what would I like to do? I just want to reflect. I think we'll start off. We're going to start off with Annie. And then we're going to go to Marlon, who'll drill down a little bit, and then Sandra is going to take us a little bit higher, I hope, and give us maybe an overview of the situation. Now, at a recent Fabians event, I don't know if you follow us intensely, but at a recent Fabians event, Rob Campbell spoke. Now, Rob was an ex-Federation of Labour and a company director. He went on to be a significant... Yeah, and he went on to thank you for the audience calling out the dark side. But he was, if we remember his last address to us, he was part of a union movement that argued for the free wage bargaining process. Now think about the free wage bargaining in terms of Mr. Muldoon saying wage freeze. We're freezing wages. And so the Labour movement's response was effectively a neoliberal response, free wage bargaining. And, very confusing. And so Rob said this period of the Labour movement was pretty confusing. I reflected on my own period in the Labour movement, which was in the mid to late 80s. And that saw unions clinging to a thing called the Qualified Preference Clause. Can anyone remember the Qualified Preference Clause? Yeah, the Qualified Preference Clause. And compulsory unionism. Which saw very active lead unions, of which Rob was a member, the drivers' union and the other unions. The lead unions would take a very active role, and everyone else would basically go to sleep, because they would deliver the going rate. And the going rate filtered down through teachers, through the public service. Really have to do anything about it. Now then the Employment Contracts Act reared its head. And prior to the Employment Contracts Act, I was in the second largest union, the education director or organiser for the Hotel and Hospital Workers Union. And I was asked to do a seminar on what's coming up. And so I asked our research director, David Tollich, to tell me what was coming up in the new 1991 Act that National will no doubt lay upon us. Now, we used to have the Arbitration and Conciliation Act, which merged into the Industrial Relations Act, then the Employment Relations Act, and it was a thick piece of work, like that. Well, by the time Dave had finished, I thought he was joking. Honestly, it was a piece like that. It was a couple of pieces of paper, and I said, "You're kidding." He said, "No, that's what they'll do." And he was right. That's what they did. The 1991 Employment Relations Act, the Employment Contracts Act was a simple, flimsy piece of paper that stripped away all of the qualified preference clauses, all of the arbitration stuff, and we were left with pretty much nothing. Over 20 years have passed, and we last talked to Annie when she had been at least 5 years into the process of the living wage program. So the living wage program was, I think, in 2012, got going, and we asked Annie to come to a Fabian's meeting like this in 2015 and give us an update. So I'm really looking forward to that. We caught up with Annie, and this will be the update.
Well, it's good to... It's great to know what it's about, because this is the first introduction that we've had. Look, it's just lovely seeing so many old friends here in the room. Mike and Maria, so lovely to see you. And also to acknowledge Jeffrey, who is the current living wage organiser based here in Auckland. And look, it's probably if I had been asked about, social movement unionism, as Paul asked me to talk about initially before we became New Unionism, I wouldn't have thought that what we were doing was that new at the time. To be fair, in 2012, we were just absolutely failing to deliver any form of decent wage rise for workers who were contracted out. So it didn't come about because of a brilliant idea. It came about because of a desperate need to do something about workers who were contracted out, where the person who paid the wages was not the person with the money in their pocket. That was the funder. And you created these triangular relationships where workers, in fact, ended up just getting whatever the funder gave to the employer. So you were sitting at the bargaining table in these exhausting, tiresome, failing bargains. And cleaners sat on the minimum wage and securities workers sat on the minimum wage. It was very difficult to shift that. And so we needed to look around and see what other options were available. And that was when the notion, and it's all kind of outlined here, so I'm not going to be boring and go into too much of it, but this wonderful book written by Lindy tells the story about the emergence of the living wage movement. And it was really about thinking, so if in fact we were just drowning in bargaining, right? You drown in bargaining and representation as unions. And that's actually the reality defined by law. That's what you do because that's what the law says, it prescribes it, and you have no time for anything else. So if you want to do something else, you've got to make a pretty strategic choice to put money into something completely different. And so the idea of a living wage movement was to see if we could kind of break down that way of working and to do something new. And there were models around the world where, in fact, people were going, well, workers are not just workers, they have whole lives. They have houses that need to be warmed. They've got kids that need to be put into care, childcare. They've got all of the different needs of working people are there, but they're not the reality for unions when they're bargaining across the table. You're just trying to get a 2% or a 1% or 3% pay rise. That, if you're lucky, that was as much as you could do. So how did we recognise that workers had these really complex lives and unions were basically on the margins of those? But we also realised that not only us, but so many other organisations across civil society cared just as much. So we met people from health organisations and churches and other community organisations and other unions who were all concerned that people were struggling and they couldn't get by. And what happened for those workers was mattered to everybody in society, not just unions. So that idea that social movement unionism wasn't just about a worker and their employment issue, it was also about what is the role of the whole of civil society in coming together to address an issue that we all shared and we all wanted to do something about. So how could we combine our forces to do that? And it led really to a completely different approach and a pretty challenging approach in terms of the way we approached unionism. And it created quite a lot of conflict within unions as well as beyond. And that's because what we were saying is that we need to stand shoulder to shoulder with other civil society organisations. Let's not just invite them to come on a ride with us because we're about to bargain something really tricky. Let's bring them alongside us. Let's share the floor together. And so that's controversial because we were struggling to survive and to fly our flag. The last thing we needed to do was give power away and stand alongside small organisations, Migrant Action Trust and others who really didn't have resources. We wanted everyone to have an equal say. So these things were pretty challenging at the time. But lots and lots of people within unions and outside of unions saw that there was real hope in that there was some way in which we could probably work towards a better sort of future. It will be very long, and it's still not there. But it was actually a very good step in the right direction, and lots has been successful. I think I should pass it over to somebody else, should I?
Okay, no, that's good.
Yeah, I don't want to go on and on.
Well, I'll introduce Marlon.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Annie. I'd like to introduce Marlon. Marlon Drake, he's a graduate of the mighty Western Springs College. Yeah, where I was the chair for 10 years. Thank you, Marlon. You're a graduate of the bestest. Marlon studied law at Vic and worked part-time for the living wage movement in Wellington and has since come up here and is lead organiser for Te Ohu Whakaowhanaunga, based in Auckland, and will tell us what you're doing. Can I get my pronunciation?
Kia ora. Thank you. Kia ora, Paul. Kia ora koutou. My name is Marlon Drake, as I've just been introduced. I'm lead organiser of Te Ohu Whakawhanaunga Tāmaki Makaurau. You can call us Te Ohu for short. Before I start, just want to acknowledge my team up the back there. We got two organisers and a wonderful leader. Raise your hands. There's Joel from the Sallies, Zio, one of our community organisers, and Jeffrey, obviously, the Living Wage, who works out of our office, and other allies in the room. As Paul mentioned, Lindy somehow trusted me with the reins of the Wellington Living Wage movement for about 2 years. And I got to start at a brilliant time in May of 2020, right in the middle of a level 4 lockdown. And so my introduction to community organising was Teams and Zoom meetings, or professional community organising. But luckily I'd had a few years as a leader before that, representing the student community down in Wellington through the Student Association, and getting involved in the living wage movement and doing things like that. And for me, the living wage movement wasn't just a sort of cool, exciting project or because we were getting wins and accreditations and things. For me, it was a reintroduction to the union movement. My first introduction to the union movement was my father getting made redundant from TVNZ. Alongside many of his colleagues, and not feeling like he could do anything about it, having been a union member for decades, and working at TVNZ for about 30 years. So the first time I heard about it, a union, was when I was 12, 13 years old, and it was Dad coming home and saying, and my mum asking, well, can the union do anything? And I'm saying, no, the union can't do anything. So my whole introduction to unionism was that the unions were powerless and they can't do anything. And I share that story not because it's true, it's not true, and I've later learned how untrue that is, but because for many people in my generation, I was born in 1997, we're children born under neoliberalism. Our whole understanding of unionism is neoliberal policy and the impacts of it that we've seen in our families and ourselves. Words like power, we only come across them when we're talking or hearing our parents talk about the power bill. The idea that politics is something for us, so that a union can be a healthy movement for change or some organisation that can make a difference. Well, that's even if we've heard of the word union before. And the amount of people in my generation, my friends, who I'd say, are you a member of the union? They say, what is a union? And it took me going to university and getting involved in the living wage movement to actually relearn and be reintroduced to what unions could be and what unions are and what unions have increasingly become over the last decade, in particular through organisations and efforts like the living wage movement. It was a reintroduction to power. It was walking into a room, my first introduction, 2017, and seeing a cleaner, a security guard, and academics. Andrew, you might have been there. There was certainly someone from TU was there, a priest and a union organiser, and it sounds like the start of a joke, but it was just a living wage at Vic planning meeting. And feeling so confused about how this priest was having a conversation with a cleaner who was speaking on their own behalf and a security guard and so forth, and thinking, wow, this is incredible. So when I got to take on the reins of the living wage role down there and use some of this methodology, this community organizing methodology, I was like, wow, this stuff is potent, this stuff is powerful. And it's really special for me to be here as well, sitting alongside Sandra, because my first office as a community organizer was in the TU Wellington office. So I used to go and take food from the TU office. And now I'm based in the Year 2 office, and I take food from the Year 2 team instead, up in Auckland. When back in 2017-18 was, I think it was 18, we were at a living wage national governance hui, and I was a representative on that board. And I spoke with Annie. It was outside the first union office in Nonehunga. And that's when Annie mentioned the idea of a multi-issue broad-based organisation. We were coming hot off the wheels of a really successful Wellington City Council accreditation. It was huge. Hundreds of people would now be getting the living wage every single year, and countless other employers in the region were suddenly piping up and doing it voluntarily. There had been a culture shift that had taken place. And when I heard about this idea of, well, what if this methodology could work with other issues, I was sold, and I was like, wow, I can't wait to see what happens. And then at the end of 2021, November, I ended up getting the role as a community organiser, and then since I've taken on the role as lead organiser of Te Ohu Whakawhanaunga, Te Ohu, which is New Zealand's first of its kind broad-based community alliance, with now 41 member organisations from unions, community organisations, and faith institutions as well, working together for the common good on those shared issues that are too big for one community to take on their own. Building relationships across different faiths, different communities, even different unions, which can be a struggle. I'm sure these two will know far better than me about how to deal with that, but also introducing new communities to unionism. For a lot of our people, this is the first time, Te Ohu is the first time they've ever done any kind of work with a union. For some of them, for our younger people, this is the first time they've met a union member or unionist. And so we're able to give a whole new introduction to what unionism could be. And what it comes down to is the methodology. Because Te Ohu isn't just a vehicle for social change, and I'll happily share some of the wins we've had in housing and local infrastructure and other projects ongoing. But it's not just about the issues. What it's about is about developing a methodology of working with the community from a union perspective, and for the community work with unions and faith interests, and developing a methodology of community organising here in Aotearoa. And that's the real secret sauce. That's the powerful stuff. Because the living wage isn't just an incredible, successful issue campaign. It's also a test run of community organising methodology. And now we're building on that, and we're really starting to see those successes at Te Ohu. And right now, Te Ohu Tāmaki, as you can guess by the name, is just Auckland focused. But some of the wins we've been able to have already are tremendous, including in the social housing space, and public housing space, mind you. The question we're now starting to ask is what it would look like for every community in Auckland, but more so every city and region in Aotearoa to have their own local community alliance, well established, well supported by an institution which delivers and trains on community organising. So that's what we're doing now, what we're looking to do, and that's enough for me, and keen to share more, but also keen to hear from Sandra, because I've heard her speak already at a different event, and I'm keen to hear some more from her as well.
Thank you, Marlon. Yeah, that's pretty amazing, mate. That community organising model is becoming a powerful tool, isn't it? And you were saying the methodology is the secret sauce. Okay, Sandra. PhD from ANU University, and worked as a student politician in Australia, and then moved to New Zealand, and very quickly moved from the University of Victoria.
Yeah, 8 years as an academic, and then into union.
And that was the Tertiary Education Union. And you've been since 2021 the National Secretary. And now is the new president of the CTU. Yee-hoo! Now, according to my wife, guys, I didn't actually happen to make it, but you gave the standout address at the Labour Party conference. It was a knockout. Yeah, it was good. Dave was there. I'm very keen to see how you respond to that issue of changing the culture. And I know I was a bit tongue-in-cheek with Jean Leckie, mentioning Jean, but that culture of bully unionism, frankly, needed to go. And this is the result of the going. The going has led to this type of organisation in the union movement. So Sandra, I'd like you to think about responding here, but also a little bit about the overstory, because the overstory is about Trump and what we're facing as a union movement. So maybe comments in that line.
Kia ora, ngā mihi nui. Ko taupori te maunga, ko waiku me Waikato Te Awa, ko ai kamahi e mahi ana, ko Sandra Gray Tokawinga, as you heard. So I hail from not too far away from here, in a little community called Waiuku. And it's a real pleasure to sit alongside two people I've worked with for quite some time now, despite being the youngest of us, Mullen. It's quite a long time now that we've worked together. And I want to cover a couple of things. And the first is I want to say, why did we get here? And Annie's kind of covered some of this as to why unionism has had to change, or needs to change if it hasn't already, and why the living wage movement was so critical in this shift. And part of that is absolutely what Annie said, which is there's a necessity. There was a necessity to shift how we operated. And it's interesting you talk about the bully boy kind of tactics of old unionism. My father detests unions, loves me luckily, detests unions, because he was a carpenter and he often ended up feeling like he was being stood over by union officials, paid union officials when he was a builder. So we have this tussle where I say, new unions aren't like that, modern unions aren't like that, not the unions I belong to. His memory is deep on what it felt like. But we had to change because there was a structural change in New Zealand. And I'm going to say there are two broken contracts from successive governments. The first is the contract around what was the first Industrial Conciliation and Arbitration Act, which was the consensus that the country would be run by government, business and workers standing alongside each other. I won't speak to the fact that we left out our Te Tiriti partners there, but that was the social contract that was established. By 1991, that social contract that put business, workers and government around the table was swept away absolutely. They began to sweep it away in the 1970s, but they swept it away totally in 1991. So we have to respond to the fact that the world changed. But there's a second way the world changed, and this is the part that where Trump is leading the charge in the Western industrialised nations, and that is they swept away a social democratic consensus in the 1980s and 1990s, and we've never returned there. We had a consensus that said we would reduce inequality as a nation, and we did it. We did it. For much of the 20th century, everyone agreed from 1935 through into the mid-80s, everyone agreed inequality was a bad thing. So they took away this social consensus that we would be social democratic and that workers would have a place at the table, and they turned the worker citizen, the whole worker, the worker that has a family and a community and an iwi and a hapu and responsibilities outside work, they turned that worker citizen into an expendable widget. A widget you could get rid of easily and quickly, but also into consumers. We ceased to be citizen workers, we became consumers, and we became in university terms, and I see my colleague Jane here, in university terms, we became part of the deficit of the budget. We were a cost, just a cost, the workers, nothing more. We were not whole people. So when you see that happen through the 80s and 90s and carries on until now, we've changed who workers are, we've changed how governments see them, we've changed how employers see them, and the outcomes necessitate a shift in what we do. Because it's 4 decades of rising inequality. If you didn't know, today, at this moment, 20% of the most wealthy New Zealanders hold 2/3 of the wealth of the country. 1% of New Zealanders hold 17% of the wealth of New Zealand. The rest of us have very little to share out. So growing inequality, rising precarity, and to all those who are the next generation of workers beyond me, I did say my generation was the first who trained to be nurses and teachers and be part of their community who fled to go overseas because there were no permanent jobs, there was no security, there was nothing for them, so they left New Zealand, and that has continued to happen. We're seeing declining wages because the wage growth we've been getting has not met inflation. If you look at this year, the average wage increase has been 2.4%, unless, of course, you're a minimum wage worker, then you're going to get 2%. And yet, electricity has gone up 11%, and fruit and veg has gone up 7.5%. So you just aren't able to keep up with the rising cost of living. And the other part of that, over those 4 decades, that disappearance of the social contract that put workers at the table, that said we will deliver an equality where we can in our society, is rising authoritarianism. And I will call it for what it is. We don't have Trump, I get that. But what we have is a government that last week alone put 12 bills into the House and passed 11 under urgency. 11 of 12 bills under urgency. Not to speak of, and as a political scientist, it absolutely shocks me that we have disenfranchised so many people. And the people we have disenfranchised are the poorest and the most underrepresented in New Zealand. Because if you can't enrol to vote and vote at the same time on election day or in the pre-election period, you will end up disenfranchised. And that is what they've done to us. So they've changed the playing field. The political class and multinational corporations have changed the playing field. Unfortunately, we as a community still want to play a team sport where we all have a go, we all get our fair turn, and we expect there to be an impartial referee. But they've made this the America's Cup now, where not only can only the rich enter into our society in full force and have what they need, but also where if you don't like the rules of the game, you just go to court or you just go to your local politician and you tell them to change the rules. And that is the reality of the game they have set up, and we now have to work out how to respond to. And we saw that with the Employment Relations Amendment Bill. We don't like the fact that Uber drivers have won their court case. We are going to change the law. So I'm going to say we have to change, and we are changing. But I also want to point out if we are going into the social movement space, and this is an area that I studied, it was what I did all of my work on when I was an academic, we also have to appreciate that movements move. That is, they change. They rise, they go into abeyance, they take periods where they are quieter. They actually do change over time, and we've got to work out how together we forge that change. We need resources, we need opportunities, and we need a framework that works for us. Unfortunately, we have fewer resources than we ever have before because of dropping numbers in union. We have fewer opportunities because of the law changes, which have reset the bar and kicked workers off the playing field or out of the boat race. And unfortunately, the frame of the country at the moment and the world is rising individualism. And I hate to say it, our response in part was transactional unionism. And I remember once at TEU noticing that the poster we put up said, "Come and get a piece of pizza," in big, bold language, as though that... So, sorry, Marlon. I know food is important, but that wasn't the point of the meeting. It wasn't a transaction where we gave members pizza. At the very bottom it said what the meeting was about. Come and hear about our latest negotiations. So we responded in part with transactionalism until we start talking living wage. And what's the key? You have to build power through coalitions. There is no doubt. You can't do it on your own. The union movement has a history, which I'll talk about shortly, around this. You have to build coalitions, and living wage, Rāwhaka Mana, which is iwi chairs, working with union leaders, the Tax Justice Coalition, the Health Coalition. There are a whole lot of coalitions starting to build because we recognise we are all in this together. We have to seek system change. That is also one of the things that new social movement unionism is all about. Social movement unionism is not just about tinkering with the rules, it is fundamentally changing the game again. And we did it once, and we can do it again. You have to have broad-based goals beyond negotiating with an employer, beyond that transactional moment. You need broad-based change, and you need to tackle the political system itself as well as the industrial system. I am going to say that unions were used to doing this. Think back to the green ban at Ōrākei Karaka when they were fighting, Ngāti Whātua were fighting for their land at Bastion Point. Unions did a green ban. There was a black ban during the the anti-nuclear movement, where unions would not deal with anyone that had any sense of being involved in nuclear shipping or anything there. The Springbok Tour, the union movement provided huge resources, huge backing for the Springbok Tour. So we are not unused to this. But I would say that the 1990s made us do what I'm going to call a hypothermic reaction. We went to protect what we thought was our heart. I'm not sure we picked the right thing. We picked bargaining over building community. And we did it for very good reason at the time, because we were fundamentally under attack and might not exist after this. But I'm going to say we're fundamentally under attack, and I'm not sure we're strong enough in the negotiating space to defend that core. I think there is something different, and I think it's probably the living wage movement approach that we do need to defend. The final one is we do need to be a movement. And in this, I kind of got a bit of a telling off for saying this the other day. I understand I have a position of leadership in the union movement, but I am not the movement. I will never be the movement. There's a wonderful, wonderful video called The Dancing Guy, which is how to build a movement in 3 minutes, and TEU uses it quite often with its members. And at first, there's some music playing, and this guy's dancing all on his own, and he's a lone nut at that point. Because when you are the only one dancing to the music, you are just a lone nut. Then the first follower gets up and starts to dance with him. And then another, and another, and another, until a whole movement is built. This is not about leaders, this is about the movement. This is about us talking to everyone we know and asking them to stand alongside us. It is about building a movement. We need the resources, we need to create the opportunities, but by God, what we need is to stand alongside each other on everything that is creating inequality. And I am going to say now, and the challenge that others heard me say to Labour, I've said it to Greens, I'll say it to Te Pāti Māori when I meet them, is no more tinkering with a more market, commercial, corporatist, individualistic system. It is time for massive system change. New Zealanders want it. We are standing up now to get Aotearoa back so everyone can thrive, not just survive.
Hi everybody. Thank you very much. Look, we've got a tremendous innovation coming up. Questions. And the questions is, I'm going to give you a little lesson on how we do it. You think up a question, you put up your hand, I rush towards you with the microphone, okay? You speak into the microphone, but before you do that, you wait, because I'm multitasking. I'm on the camera, and the camera comes round, and I give you the thumbs up, and you ask the question. Do I have to do it again? Okay, it's pretty good. Okay, let's do it. First question. No one. No questions. You've got the best, this is the best panel. Richard. Okay, careful on this one, Richard. Hold it. Wait. Okay.
Yeah, I agree that there's a lot of discontent about the system, but there's no real image of what is to come, what system we want. I mean, if you look at one of the more obvious one is our electric power system. But, buying it back means half the budget, to get the electricity system back. So what work is being done on what is to come to replace the system which is so inequitable?
I'm happy to make a first comment. Is that going? Yeah. Okay, cool. One of the things that really struck me while I was listening to Sandra is that there isn't one thing we have to do. There's not one movement, there's not one community alliance, there's not one political party, there's not one of anything. We've got aviation workers, crew and aeroplanes who've just been threatening strike action. They were going to go on strike. They've just received a deal that's good enough to take out, but they never got that without being prepared to go on strike. There's not one thing. We would love to have a community campaign at the airport so that the airport community came together around decent wages, because surprisingly, many of those wages are very bad across the airport. Once they were great, but they're not. But that's a fabulous opportunity to do a form of place-based campaigning where we build a connection across all of those workers, the iwi, the communities, the various people that are associated with this vast community of the airport. So, but there's not one thing, and it's very slow and very iterative. And in the end, we really believe when you look at broad-based organising that you listen for the problems and the solutions from the communities that you're with. And if that's the crew on aeroplanes saying, we want X amount, that's what we're listening to. But in community organising, we do listening campaigns and we listen to what matters most, because that's what's going to bring together all those strangely diverse people that come into a room that Marlon talked about, where the priest and the organiser and the community worker all sitting side by side to work out what to do. We need that. And so I think that, Richard, there's not one solution to it, and there are plenty of people coming up with policies, but we need to listen and give those communities the agency to stand up and speak to the problems that are burning in their hearts, because that's the power that shifts politicians and starts to bring about a shift that's transformational.
I tautoko everything Annie's just said. I just want to quickly drop in a story. As part of our housing listening campaign earlier this year, we had 11 table talks, which is a specific kind of community meeting that we hold to go out and listen, hear stories. It's about stories first, relationships, building power. And it's not an extractive process. We're trying to find people who can be a part of the policy process the whole way through. And one of these table talks was at Merge Cafe. You'll know it, Richard, which is on K Road, and it's run by LifeWise, and it's a cafe that is centred around the street community, bringing the street whānau, as they're called, those who are currently experiencing homelessness. And it's a way for them to access services, but also just to have a place to go in town that belongs to them. So we held our table talk there, and we had about 15 people from that community who are either just sort of finished experiencing homelessness and are now in a social house, or were currently homeless. And also at those tables, we had policy experts from Community Housing Aotearoa. And the solutions that came from the homeless people was the same solutions that came from the policy experts. And in fact, in terms of navigation of the system, people who are living on the street can tell you exactly what form, exactly what part of the policy process needs to change. What they don't have is the sort of systemic expertise to be able to initiate that policy change process, or of course the power yet to be able to change those policies. But what we saw quickly through that listening process is that actually with the right kind of experts in the room, policy experts, and the people's lived experience, you can build a lot of power, and a lot of that common understanding is already there. The vision for the future is already there. What's lacking is just the belief and the possibility and the relationships to make it happen.
The energy policy, CGU did put out a detailed buyback as you bake dividends government approach. So it was affordable and was doable. So there is that type of work being done. But I think the biggest thing we actually have to get across right now is another world is possible. People actually don't think it is possible. When I say there is a world possible where everybody can look after their kids and feed their kids and live in warm, dry houses, people say you're dreaming. So I think the first and foremost thing is we want a different world. A different world is possible, and we will one at a time tick off things that are going to shift the world for everyone. But I do think we're still in the space of going, well, it's not really possible, is it? I mean, 4 decades. Marlon talked about living under neoliberalism. I'm 56 years old. Neoliberalism began when I was 14. I don't remember a world beyond neoliberalism, and yet I can dream of one. And I think now is the time for action to say, we will shift it. And we have two parties, we have to make sure shift it, and it is the Labour and Greens if we're talking legislation. But in our own communities, we can shift it without legislation. And the Toitu Tiriti campaign shows that the campaign to keep tiriti in schools, that was despite legislation. So let's dream it, let's do it, but let's believe. Let's believe, and I kind of start to implore people for the sake of the kids around us, let's believe it's possible and make it happen.
Ravenstone, thanks for the great presentations, very heartening. I just have a question about the new unionism and the place of unpaid work. I've sometimes felt, looking at policy proposals coming through Labour Party, etc., that there's very much a focus on people who are in paid employment with an employer, and I know that you're branching out to sort of the precariat as well. And I just wondered where you thought all the unpaid work, particularly women caring for family members or disabled people who through discrimination or whatever can't get work, where that fits into the new scenario.
It's a really good point, and it's been very much on the minds even in the beginnings of the living wage movement, how we build those coalitions with Child Poverty Action Group, with AAAP, with many organisations that are representing the interests of those who are not in paid work. Because people are not just in one job. People, especially private sector workers, are in and out of jobs all the time. One day you're lucky enough to have one, and then you might be unlucky enough not to have one, as Marlon's father was. I think it happens in coalition because unions have to represent the workers that become members. We want more members, we want better laws so that we can have that those benefits spread across a wider range of people. We want secure work and things like social income insurance, so there's a bridging between one job and another as the world changes underneath people. We want these kinds of things and fight for them as a union movement, but the best work we can do is when we sit alongside the other organisations that are in these coalitions to take up that fight together. Because one of the principles of broad-based organising is that you have your issue and others will stand alongside you, right? So we speak for the whole. When we say we want decent housing, as unions, no, it's not our bread and butter. But yes, absolutely, we go to those events to push for decent housing because we're standing with those people knowing that the next time they will be standing with us. That's the kind of solidarity that we have to build beyond unions so that we're keeping people connected and close and understanding that it's in all of our interests to act together.
Kia ora. I just reflect on when I was in Wellington, one of the last campaigns I volunteered in my spare time was around council tenants living in council housing in Wellington. And it was initiated actually by a partnership between a E2 delegate called Rosie Ngakopu, who was a security guard and also had been involved in the living wage movement. And then also one of her friends in council housing, neighbours, who was a Muslim woman, refugee from Somalia, who wasn't at that time in work. And we built a core team of council housing tenants, and 8 of the 12 in that team were not in current employment and were on some sort of state-supported benefit. And they organised over the course of about 4 or 5 months, in, I should say, 2021 COVID, which was not as bad in Wellington, but still pretty bad. It meant that we could only limit numbers at our actions. 3 actions, each with 100 people, the legal maximum, at the Kilburnie Mosque, at St Peter's on Willis, and also at the Newtown Community Hall, Community Centre. And it was present at those meetings and facilitating all of those meetings were different leaders from the living wage movement who had relationships with Rosie that Rosie was able to pull along. And so for me, seeing early on how just through introducing some tactics, some strategy, a relational model of organising, those who were not in current employment were able to win a rent freeze and a total review, a mayoral task force on council housing and a bunch of other stuff which happened too, being led by a core team which was majority non-workers. And then who showed up at the Fair Pay Agreements Forum later that year on Zoom? It was people from those council housing communities. And that was when I thought, oh man, when I go up to Auckland, this Te Ohu stuff is going to be really cool, because already it's starting to see some of that. So this is one example of where this model is inclusive of those people too.
The one thing I'd call out here is the structure that we operate in, which is neoliberal capitalism or more market capitalism, requires a huge number of people to be in unpaid and volunteer work. So we have to start with the why. Are we so reliant on people who aren't in paid work? But I am also going to say one of the biggest things you see in the 1980s and 90s as the union movement absolutely goes to protect its members. These are the people who pay the bills for the movement, is the rift that happens with workers who are out of work. And I think we should stop calling them unemployed, because the truth is right now, there are 400,000 New Zealand who are underutilised. They're either unemployed, so they are workers without work, or they're workers with too little work. And we need to absolutely call the system for that. The system requires that. The system requires all of us as women to take on more care burden, no matter whether we have children. We take on more care burden than we should have to, because that is what the system needs. So we need to keep pointing to the problem, which is the system. And again, this comes back to the what is the change. It is getting rid of market capitalism, and other nations have done it, and we once did it. We can do it again.
Robert Howell. I googled ILO and climate change to see what was happening with unions worldwide, and one of the things that persistently came up was that unions are taking on the issue of a just transition, where they're recognising the real threat of climate and ecological degradation generally, and then they're actually starting to write into their awards issues about that, and there are in a number of cases employers are responding, and employer groups are really responding very positively. I wondered how far has the union actually taken the issue of ecological degradation and thought it through in terms of a significant engaged program with the community?
Yeah, thank you. Just transition is really important, and one of the things we discovered when we had 3 years supported by Labour around the potential closure of Tiwai smelter, when we conducted a huge community-wide, government-wide, iwi connected program of what would the future look like and how do we shape it. This was a big part of the Southland conversation for 3 years prior to this government. We realised that you have to have a multi-layered approach, that you cannot do it without government. Rio Tinto owns the smelter, basically. They're one of the biggest union-smashing companies in the world. Rio Tinto has not allowed a union inside those doors since the Employment Contracts Act. In fact, the union had an office, and they bought in one of those big kind of gradery things, and it was like a big box, and they lowered a hook from the other side of the fence, and they lifted up the union office, and they took it away. That was 1991. We finally had the government say to New Zealand Aluminium Smelter, if you don't allow the union into this site, we will no longer talk to you. The government needed the smelter conversation, and the smelter needed the government. They opened the doors, and for the first time since 1991, we were able to walk in and have what's actually a lawful conversation, right? You're entitled to access, but it's not so easy getting access to a smelter. And that was because we had government on board. The government is not on board with this, right? So we've had offshore wind farm companies leaving the country now because they're going to do sea bottom mining, and you can't run the two things at the same time. So all the conversations that us and MUNS and RMTU were having with offshore wind farms to make sure that over the next 30 years this would be a unionised workforce where there were decent wages, all ended. And it ended because this government ended it by allowing those licences to go ahead. So it's a very complex story. There's been a lot of discussion about just transition in the union movement, and sometimes we talk about it as the transformation that AI is going to bring about, or other technologies where people will lose their jobs en masse. But the environmental story is an immensely important one. We find it difficult to tell the coal miners and gold miners in our union, right, that sorry, buddy, your job's going, because their families depend on that income. What we do is we talk about just transition, and they have got to the point where they now say, well, we don't want to just we don't want a transition, but if we have to, we want a just transition. So we have to inch them along that road, because they are sick of people going to the west coast of the South Island and telling them, don't worry, tourism's going to give you a job. Because they know what you get in tourism. You get the minimum wage and a precarious job. So these are very complex issues, but it's multi-layered and many stakeholders are involved in it. And I would really question that it could be done with a hostile government.
It's certainly, I think, growing in all unions as an issue. It is not an easy issue to tackle, as Annie said, because workers' jobs are on the line. I think one of the areas at the moment where we have seen a government totally attack the education system is if you degrade your education system, which they are doing. This issue will never be resolved, because we need a vibrant and dynamic schooling and tertiary system for just transitions. We also need a vibrant and dynamic science community, and if you didn't read last year's budget, certainly read this year's. They took out all the science advisors out of the budget. So a government that just denies science and denies the importance of it. So the thing we have to fight back with, of course, is saying we trust the science, and that's quite hard for us to do, because most of us aren't that scientifically numerate or literate. So, but we do need to say we do trust the scientists. Climate change has been on us for the last 50 years. It's not just something new. We haven't addressed it yet. We are running out of time, unfortunately, human beings, not the planet. Very different thing. But we do need to start being much more aggressive in saying we believe the science and we need to sit down. And I would say the one area that we're absolutely talking about is this cannot be done without workers at the table, because the other ingredient that's missing is this government doesn't believe in science, they do believe in profits, and they don't believe that workers should have a seat at the table, and it's often workers who come up with the best solution for what should happen in their industry. So we need businesses and government to realise how powerful our knowledge as workers is and make sure that we're at the table.
I'll just add on to that quick story. Hunter Valley in Australia is a coal town, and we affiliate with the Industrial Areas Foundation, and we've got a partner alliance in the Hunter Valley called the Hunter Community Alliance. And Zio and I were able to go to their founding, where there was about 800 to 900 people in a beautiful hall called the Great Hall. Now, Newcastle's interesting because Rupert Murdoch gives Sky News for free in areas, working class areas like Hunter Valley, because he wants to manipulate people into climate denial. So the stakes are really up against this community. But in that community, you have a community of coal miners and coal workers who are suffering from the impacts of low quality air. Also have issues, obviously, with their employers as well, and a whole range of mental health issues too. But also are concerned and were afraid of changes to climate policy and the reduction of usage of coal, obviously because it would be their jobs and their livelihoods and their whole community. So the Hunter Community Alliance embarked on a process with faith organisations, with the unions, local unions, coal workers as well, and even a local Aboriginal elders as well from the First Nations there. And at their founding, their ask was an ask to the Federal Minister of Energy, or whatever of the proper position is, around investment in offshore wind turbines, and a guarantee that those jobs would go towards coal workers in a phase-out just transition. And that process took years of trust building across civil society institutions led by that community alliance. So just sharing that story.
Phil Herring. Am I audible? Yeah. I just want to ask a question about the role of the neighbourhood in the new politics. I ask it because you can imagine a street where there is a sprinkling of Labour, a sprinkling of National, but there's probably more houses in that street which are disillusioned with politics and don't participate by joining or even articulating what it is that they're worried about. They're probably already a bit sceptical about any politician that knocks on their door anyway, and so the street votes and we get a result. I think one of the things we've missed out on is the significance in that street of the list candidates. I know the unions are one of the organisations which may have some role because they will be organising from one of the positions that you've just articulated, from the person's work or the person's association if they belong to Rape Crisis or Family Poverty Action or something or other. They may be connected to politics in that way. But I think list candidates have got a job to go into houses where people are sitting on that disillusionment and bring them into the political debate so that the electorate candidates can then have meetings of solidarity with the list candidate community and the housing, the ones that are more comfortable in their own space people. And there's a solidarity can be created at that moment. And I think we need to develop the role. At the moment, I see political parties using list candidates as just filler-inners in electorates where you can't get somebody to stand because it's a seat that belongs to somebody else. And I think that's just a waste. And it also means that we don't get leadership who really grows and bears witness to the people who are in those houses which are feeling disillusioned. We don't get enough angry people feeling that there's somebody in Parliament who speaks on their behalf and does a good job on their behalf. And so I'm putting a bit of a weight behind the argument for let's improve the type of person and the type of operation and the type of campaigning that actually amounts to being a list candidate, drawing out from a neighbourhood the people who otherwise don't participate in the political process.
I could just tell a story about a road crossing in Avondale, which for 12 years the school and local parents and families had been asking Auckland Transport to deliver road safety improvements. For 5 years they'd been asking for a road crossing, and over 2 years there were 4 children who were hit by cars, 2 of whom were hospitalised, and in a neighbourhood increasingly intensifying. With more and more industry as well, the issues around traffic and dangerous traffic was only increasing. We sat down, we worked with the assistant principal to develop an 8-month organising plan at Te Kuroa Pātiki, Rosebank Primary School, on Rosebank Road in Avondale. And we're able to support them to use community organising methodology to build a coalition at the pace, obviously, of teachers' capacity, which is, as you can imagine, not huge. And over that period of time, they were able to have a successful campaign. And now when you drive down to Rosebank Road, there's a beautiful crossing in exactly the position that children were running across the road over the last 12 years. And I was able to go afterwards and meet with the assistant principal and say, well, how has the community reacted to this? How are they feeling? And she said, everyone's just been saying the same thing. It felt like we built that. I said, because you did. Because over the last 12 years, Auckland Transport didn't have to listen to you, and then suddenly they did because you got organised. That same school turned out, and that community around it, I Love Avondale, which is a community neighbourhood organisation we're working with, turned out 70 to our founding, where we got commitments on 1,000 public houses a year. That same school got organised around the Treaty Principles Bill, and also reorganised their parent action group when they realised how much power they had. I won't speak for list candidates, that's for affiliate unions to talk about, but I will say my interest in the power of community organising is that a community and neighbourhood can self-organise without even needing to engage with a list candidate or a politician until they're ready with an ask, and then can not only tackle the issues in their own neighbourhood, but also participate in broader conversations and broader actions around some of the bigger issues. And I was in Vienna recently at reading some socialist stuff at a socialist museum, and I know this will be of interest to Fabians, and the key point they said is that democracy is not self-fulfilling. Democracy requires people to make it work. and it doesn't exist on any kind of policy or any kind of politician doing it. It relies on neighbourhoods getting organised in themselves and having the ability to do so. So I reflect on the journey that school went on and still going on. Now they're fighting for the racecourse. Have you seen the racecourse campaign in New Zealand here recently? That school is a leading member of that campaign and that action.
Look, I think that we can do all of these things. You know, I'm in a union that's affiliated to the Labour Party. The marvellous Abraham is over here, and he's been a cleaner and a politician and an organiser and multiple different roles. And we believe in getting people into Parliament. But I'm also part of an alliance where I take the party hat off to do small p politics, where we work out what people want and we challenge politicians to deliver on that. And actually we find that over and over again, they are receptive to the things that we ask if we've done the work. But it's not to say the work's easy. So I'm sure that you're right about that as being one possible way of working. It's just another way of doing it.
I think there's a couple of things here. People are disillusioned with big P politics. They're disillusioned with institutions because they're failing to deliver. My concern at the moment, it's very, very easy, and I'm one of those people, you'll see me a lot saying this government is doing horrendous things. It's very easy to point and say, look, don't vote for them. But the upshot of that for people who are disillusioned is they won't vote. So we need to have to give them a reason to vote, something to vote for, if that's the part you're concerned with. But the other thing that I find quite difficult is, now the head of the CTU, when I think about it, is there are, I'm guessing now, I think it's 2.3 million workers in New Zealand, I think, something around that, who are in work at the moment. And 315,000 of them are affiliated to the Council of Trade Unions. I want to create the neighbourhood where everybody looks around and goes, I'm in union. You were saying it's the first time people meet unionists when they come in so many forums. They've probably met unionists many, many times. People just haven't said, I'm proud to be union. We need to say, why do people not see us as their neighbourhood, as their place, as their home, as their tūranga waiwai? We need to examine that, and we need to make it real that every worker, without question, goes, my neighbourhood is the other workers in the neighbourhood.
Kia ora everyone. It's probably a sister question to some degree from Robert's one relating to just transitions in that area. What would a kind of a green jobs and just transition alliance type approach look like, informed from the movements you've spoken to before and informed from the earlier work that E2 and others have done, that's been done in the coal regions in Australia and elsewhere? So yeah, a bit of a question regarding like a green jobs type approach, so we can actually answer people in blackball or in extractive industries and go beyond what Naomi Klein calls notional jobs, when it's like, it would be nice if this happened, but we haven't actually done the work to make that, you know, an actual possibility. Yeah, so some kind of next steps or a little bit past that. Any clues? Thank you.
I'll just briefly say it's hard to lay out a listening campaign plan, but I would say that is the function of a listening campaign and establishing relationships in the neighbourhood. I think just I have some real imagination around communities like Tokoroa and Kinleith Mill. I was supporting an action, some workers down there to run an action, 500-person action last year with the Kinleith Mill. And we went down there, we met with workers and community leaders, in particular Cook Island communities, which is obviously huge in Tokoroa. Iwi were present as well. And I just went around and asked people, would you be interested in doing an alliance around this? And everyone else was like, yeah, we need to. It's just having the infrastructure and the support and the methodology to get there is really important. But in a neighbourhood like that, often the relationships already exist. There's immense amounts of trust in some of these towns and the various parts of Aotearoa outside the major cities. The key thing that is missing is an intentionality of strategy. And what I say is a lot of communities are organised, but they're just not organised for power. Or they don't have the tools to exercise the power that they may have. And so for a community like that, it would just be about going in and identifying who are those people, who are those key leaders in the community that already exist, and trying to bring them together. But it's hard to lay out, a full sort of plan, but I'm sure there's other examples from both of you.
It's a good challenge, and I think that just to pick up on what Marlon said, is our members at Waihi Gold Mine have really good ideas about what they think should happen. They don't actually want to destroy the world around them. They just want good lives for their families. And it's entirely possible to start building that. The resources are immense. So the work that Marlon and his tiny team sitting at the back, i.e. Zeo, do is incredible to build this alliance. And yes, it's sort of navigating multiple different organisations because it's an institution building process. But it takes a long time and it takes a lot of effort. But it is about building and enriching those institutions. And one of the things that Marlon is busy working on, and we've been talking about recently, is how do we do a deeper dive into the institutions of unions in order to support those unions to grow the skills to become more relational, more targeted, more campaign-oriented, more able to reach out to other allies beyond the union as well as within it. So for me, that was a really exciting step, that we could actually not just connect some people in the different unions together, but actually drive down to make each of those institutions stronger in themselves. And that includes other partners within the alliance who want to be stronger. That's why they're coming to this whole idea, because they want to get strong. We've had Jeffrey building a South Auckland network, and with about 30 organisations, is it, Jeffrey? Yeah, amazing feat. It's really hard with our civil society that's so disconnected from itself to build meaningful connections like that. But I think that that's the powerhouse for the future.
There's a couple of thoughts on top of my head, and I guess from a union movement perspective. One is unions have always fought for climate justice very, very strongly and put resource into it. That hypothermic reaction I talked about, where again it's one of the things that tended to go because it wasn't in that space of wages and jobs. So I think we have to acknowledge that there's a long history of unionism doing that. One of the difficulties is when you go hypothermic and you come into a servicing space, your paid teams and your volunteers who have more time off to do the work get very caught up in individualised cases, and so we need to recollectivise the union movement to say that is not the core business of unions in some ways. Of course we need to defend people's rights, but we do need to collectivise their rights to look after the planet. So I think well, I think you've got to build you've got to build the will first, and at the moment I wouldn't say it's deep enough, the will to do that and to create the vision. And I was going to say, and I think the problem at the moment is the cost of living crisis. For 40% of workers, every day they get up and they can't afford the bus and they can't afford to feed their families. And that unfortunately wipes out any future thinking. So it may be that we've got to solve one crisis before we address the next, unfortunately. Because when you are starving, and people literally are in New Zealand, we have a real problem of getting through this next bigger project, which is making them care beyond today. So I do fear we're in that space at the moment. So we've got a lot of work to do.
Kia ora. It feels terrible to be saying this after the cost of living kōrero from Sandra, but one of the things that we've got at the back is if people are interested in supporting the development of community organising in Aotearoa, down the back. Jeffrey, put your hand up. Jeffrey, pink shirt, beautiful. If people are interested in supporting that, we are always fundraising, always looking for supporters, and also you'll be on a newsletter list too, so you can come along because this mahi is expanding, but also with that expansion is certainly a requirement for organising resources as we organise people. So, kia ora.
Sandra, thank you very much for a fantastic event. Now, because we have such a fantastic crew here, and particularly because we've got a visitor from England, we're having drinks upstairs. supper room and you can catch up with these people.
Cool. Lovely. Lovely.